back to Inside the Box. I'm your host, Joanna Lee, and we are in the 6th episode in the celebration of Canada Day, Homegrown edition. Today's guest is a wonderful concert pianist, educator, and chamber musician. He has been a two-time recipient of the Silva Gelber Award from the Canada Council for the Arts, aired numerous times on CBC, and has been aired on Breakfast TV for City TV. At 13, he performed a debut concert with the Edmonton Symphony, and since then has performed with the Toronto Symphony, Ottawa International Chamber Music Festival, Afiora Quartet, Ralston String Quartet, and the Art Ensemble. He has been featured in CBC's 30 Under 30 list as part of its next series. Please give a warm welcome to Dr. Todd Yaniw. Hi, Todd. It's really great to have you here today.
Hi, thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure.
So, let's start off with your origin story and how you got to where you are today.
Well, I'll give sort of a brief summary of what I've done in my life. I was born in Edmonton. My father's side is Ukrainian, and my mother's side is sort of English. Grew up in Edmonton. We went to high school together. I should mention the sort of first important teacher I had was Michael Massey, and he largely helped form who I am as an artist today. I still feel really indebted to him. I think it was for the last 2 years of high school where my family moved to Waterloo, Ontario, which was a big change, but one that I really came to like. I studied with Jamie Parker and later James and Agneson at the Young Artist Performance Academy and later the Glenn Gould School. James was a huge factor in my life. Really taught me how to play the instrument in a better way and to refine my ideas while still staying true to myself. I did graduate school in the States, went to Rice and studied with Canada's own John Camara Parker, which is wonderful, such a great player, and finished my studies with a doctorate in Austin with South African pianist Anton Nel, who lives in Austin now. I've been really lucky in terms of my training. I've had all of those teachers were fantastic for me in different ways, and they really sort of made me examine myself and think hard about who I want to be as an artist. So that's me.
And not to mention, there were many great Canadian teachers in your career path.
Yeah, for sure. Most of them are Canadian. And I mean, while Jim is from Boston, he's been in Canada for so long. I think we can safely call him a Canadian.
Oh, you don't have to be born in Canada to be a Canadian. You
exactly
just have to get your citizenship, and voila, presto, you are Canadian.
Yeah.
That being said, what are your views on higher education after all your experiences?
Well, I've never been a school type, and the first thing, no, I really had my heart set on going to the Glenn Gould as my, university equivalent, if you will, and I really had this idea that would be the end of my post-high school studies, and I had this idea that I should just go out and play, and thankfully I had people guiding me and saying, just hold on a second, you're not ready for that, you've got to refine what you're doing, you have to meet more people, explore new worlds, you can't just go out there, you're not ready and you won't develop properly. And they were right. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I mean, university was a huge thing in my life. I made all sorts of friends, a few in the States who I keep in touch with regularly. Great people, and I got to work with, play with great artists. And I learned a lot from playing with them and from my teachers and from class. I had some great classes. I think it was in my doctorate where I really started to enjoy school and really get in deep with some of those subjects. And it was, I'm not going to say it was fun, but it was really rewarding, and I don't regret it. And I would encourage anyone to just go as far as you can with your studies, and you'll probably surprise yourself.
Great advice. What are your thoughts on competition, being in the scene and all?
Oh, competitions. So, I did a lot of little competitions when I was a kid, and I think what that really taught me was that, and I, for the most part, successfully was able to remind myself every time I competed later in life. What I learned was that you're competing with yourself. As soon as you think about that other kid who's playing this piece, or the fact that there was, in one instance in Edmonton, there was one teacher who just, I think this one concerto was being played like 14 times in a row in this concerto competition class, and I was like, how am I gonna measure up to this, this assembly line almost? And anyway, what I really learned was that none of that matters. All that matters is how are you doing? How am I doing in relation to where I should be? And nothing else really matters, because we're all at different places in our lives, and we all have slightly different goals and different circumstances. So the good thing about competitions is that you can really push yourself and see what your limits are in a healthy way. It should be in a healthy way. Although once I wasn't so healthy about it, in terms of physicality, which I'll talk about later. It's always a great chance to play. The pressure of a competition for me was always the worst. I think it was maybe competitions and auditions. It's a different kind of pressure. But then when you go out and play a concert, which is what I'm about, it's so liberating. And of course, do I get nervous for performances? Well, a little. But it's a healthy nervous. And I think competitions sort of increase your tolerance, if you will, to pressure. And that's a good thing about them. And the other obvious benefits are, prepping big programs and just being the best you can be.
That's wonderful and great advice, especially to those who are striving to go into competition. It's a very healthy mindset and something that most competitors should adapt to. And the fact of the matter is, there's always going to be someone better than you.
Yep, for sure. And we can learn from each other.
Yeah, absolutely. And that being said, what are your current roles?
So right now, post school and everything, I've been working at the Royal Conservatory of Music, specifically at the Glenn Gould School, largely as a collaborative pianist and coach. And I've been coaching for the Taylor Academy, which is the pre-college division. And I'm going to start teaching my first piano student there next year, so I guess that will make me piano faculty. It's been really rewarding these past 5 or so years, working with so many different people, ranging from ages between about 10 and my age, so 30s. And I think hopefully I inspire them, but they certainly inspire me, and I learn from them. It's great to see what's happening in the minds of some of these really young Wunderkind. They can do really amazing things, and just seeing sort of the spark that goes off is it's a joy. It's been wonderful working there, especially coaching chamber music. I really enjoy that. Getting people to work together, getting people to listen to one another, getting people to understand and feel and be sensitive.
Speaking of chamber music, you and I should definitely collaborate soon.
Yes, we should.
Well, that being said, how would you prepare for a performance?
Well, preparing for a performance, it's like what I said about competitions. You're competing with yourself. It's you. The obvious is that you have to pace your prep. The idea of like distributed learning versus trying to cram the night before the exam. It's the same concept. So even if you have a limited amount of time, say a week and a half or something, and that's happened a lot to me, it's important to pace it. And don't try to cram, whether it's at the beginning or the end of the prep. Just very carefully give yourself manageable goals. That's what I do each day. Because if I give myself expectations that are far too high, and this applies to teaching too, if you give your student too many expectations and you expect everything at once, it just won't happen, and they'll be frustrated. And it's the same when we prep our own things. If we end up trying to do too much at once, there's just too much. Usually, it just ends up being a negative experience. You end up fighting yourself. And I've really found that when I carefully just say, no, Todd, that's not happening today. That technical problem will sort itself out tomorrow. Because you've put in the time to figure out how to do it. Now your body needs to sleep on it. And most of the time that works surprisingly well. And that's a big part of my strategy. And that's how I'm able to learn music quite quickly. And that's probably how my colleagues do it too. Something similar anyway. And prepping, one thing that some of my friends disagree with me about is that when I prep repertoire, I tend not to listen to recordings of what I'm working on. Some people say, well, who are you? Why don't you go listen to this great person or that great person? And I will listen to those people. It's just that I don't want to do it when I'm learning something, because I feel like I'm too impressionable and I'll end up inevitably imitating that, even if I intend to or not. Or rather, if I don't intend to, I might still do it anyway. Just because I think it's human nature. If we hear something that's good, we'll try to copy it.
Absolutely.
And I think it kind of takes a lot of the fun out of it too. It's more rewarding in the long run to come to your own conclusions. You've still got all of your teachers sort of helping you in the back of your mind, and all of the other people that you've learned from and worked with. So you're still actually riding on the opinions of others, but it's sort of synthesized in your own voice, So, and I think that's a big part of my style and in preparation, but also just as a player in general. I like to be as true to the styles and composers that I play, be as true as possible, or I think anyway, but still do it in a personal way.
Speaking of authenticity, it seems like it's been serving you well, because you have been incredibly successful with avoiding major injuries. What measures do you take to avoid it?
Well, I should say that there were a couple of times I got injured. One of them wasn't really playing related, but the one time that was, I think I mentioned before, I was prepping for a competition. It was at the end of my first year of undergrad, and I had to learn something quickly, and it was difficult technically, and I kind of wore myself out. I ended up winning this competition, but I don't know if it was worth it, because then for 6 weeks I didn't really play. Lifting a cup of coffee was difficult. So in that situation, I did what I was told. I mean, I went to the doctor. He referred me to a sports physiotherapist, and I recovered over a few weeks, just doing stretches, nothing too crazy, and no painkillers or anything. But I didn't play. What worries me is that I see a lot of people pressured into sort of playing through the pain, and that's really dangerous. I think if things start to feel strange, it's because you need to stop. You need to find a better way of doing something. And if your teacher isn't giving it to you, then find someone who can. Whether it's a medical practitioner or a friend, anyone. Because chances are it's not just the workload. It's something else. Something is wrong. The physical approach is wrong. And I think that's why I've been lucky, is the physical approach. And frankly, I have James and Agnes to thank for that. I think without what I gained from him, I may have had more issues. But once you sort of understand your body well enough and have a good, healthy relationship with the instrument, and just have a really close awareness of what's happening. Like, if you suddenly, my wife does this too, she's a pianist, and if you suddenly stop on a note, you actually make sure that that arm weight is going where it's supposed to be, instead of just like holding it up, things like that. And it's so important when you're practicing, whether it's slow or doing run-throughs or whatever, always be physically connected and aware of what's happening with your body.
Would you say that would be related to body awareness technique?
Not anything specific. No, just being aware. Because I think it's really, we have a lot of things to do as musicians and as performing artists. A lot of what we do is athletic with our joints and fingers and everything. It's taxing already. But then we have all of these musical details and things to memorize, and it's easy to just not care and think, well, it hurts now, it's fine. But it doesn't work that way. And often, if you find a healthy physical solution, it will usually end in a better musical result, because you have a better relationship with yourself and the instrument. Usually then the sound production will be better. But also, I think if there isn't that tension, and sometimes pain, if it's really that bad, then you're able to think more freely. You're able to listen more closely. So, there's been a few times where, say in February, when I play 30 auditions, or April, May, I play 30 to 40 recitals. If I have a day where I'm just feeling like my body needs a rest, I will move rehearsals to the next day and just go home. And that clears my mind, and it rests my body. It's important. And I think going through school, it's important to remember that and not just feel weak. Oh, I'm weak if I show any sign of injury or... No, I don't think so. I think it's a sign of strength if you know when to quit. If you know when to go home, because things aren't going to get better that day anyway. You've done what you can. Now you need to think about it, and you need to let your body rest.
So
and the next day will be better.
Yeah. You're right. Self-care and efficiency, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's excellent. Speaking of being in both positions of student and teacher, how should we approach teaching and educating others?
I think as a teacher, it's really important to tailor your approach to each individual person you work with. And it's easier said than done, especially when you've just met a person and you don't know much about where they're coming from. previous teachers or what they want to do with their lives. So that's a challenge. It's also, I mean, it's a rewarding one to sort of tailor your approach. What I really would aspire to be is a teacher who makes the student self-sufficient, who can come up with their own strategies, not just for preparation or avoiding injury, but, you know, interpreting the music they play, understanding the language, getting to know these composers more through the scores and through listening, listening very closely to what they do and to each other. I have to say, like, coaching chamber music is probably the most rewarding for me, because I get to have the added challenge of tailoring to multiple people at once, and then sort of having the group approach, sort of addressing them as a group, and just getting them to sort of let loose a little bit. You know, that's really what chamber music is, sort of finding each other in musical streams, if you will, you know, finding a comfort level so that you can really push the envelope and you can really do what you want to do. You can say what you want to say. That's what I would try to be as a teacher, to have them express what they want to express. So give them whatever tools they need to do that.
That's great to advise others to do that as well. And it is important to tailor and cater towards the student rather than have a singular approach, right?
Yes. It's very important.
Yeah. Speaking of young minds, what would you tell young musicians who are like-minded and striving to be like you or pursuing a similar career path to yours?
Well, I would say just a word of caution. Make sure this is what you want. It's a tough one. It's a tough career. If you really love it, then do it. By all means. And I think right now the most valuable thing I could say is that you should be confident, not overbearing, and you should be humble too. You should be open to other people's ideas. You should, you know, listen to your peers, their playing and their ideas. But don't be afraid to promote yourself. I mean, some people are better at that than others. I'm notoriously bad at it. And I have a few friends that are too. And I'm finally learning that's a very important skill. We can't just be good musicians and that's it. We have to put ourselves out there. So I would say, do that. I mean, don't be afraid of it. I was working on a recording yesterday that it was from January, and I tagged it onto someone's session, and it was at 1 a.m. I wasn't even intending for this to be promotional material, and, you know, I was listening back to it, and I thought, well, it's better than I remember. It's not perfect, but none of us are perfect, so why not, you know? I would also say that stay true to yourself. I will just say this now. There are going to be situations where you disagree. And always be open to learning something new. But if at the end of the day it really rubs you the wrong way, or if it goes against who you are as an artist, just take the advice and move on. It's fine. You know, I'm sure some part of that conflict will have taught you something anyway. But whatever you do, do not just give in to it. Because, you know, I've seen this happen to a few people, and you can lose yourself. You can be sort of a sum of goals of other people, and you end up losing what your goal was in the first place. It's dangerous. So just be true to yourself, I would say. Always remember why you're doing what you're doing. And that the idea is to communicate with one another, not just to lock yourself in a practice room, because then you end up really just having an audience of one, yourself.
That is
So it's not very useful.
true. That's not. Thank you for sharing that. That is great advice, not only to the young minds of tomorrow, but also to musicians all around the world. Speaking of worldly issues, how is the pandemic affecting you and your lifestyle?
Well, when COVID hit, I remember I was busy enough that it was sort of in the back of my mind. I knew something was obviously wrong, and people were starting to freak out. But I was kind of not taking it seriously enough. The hand sanitizers kits started showing up at school, and I was like, yeah, okay, so I would use them. And I remember, I think it was March 13th or somewhere around there, I went to do a class at U of T, a violin class, and I think 3 people showed up, and then it hit me. I was like, this is serious. And everyone just looked like, Armageddon was coming. And the next day, everything I had planned was canceled, shut down. All of those 30 to 40 recitals were canceled or put off indefinitely. So for a few days, I was kind of shell-shocked, and I had no idea what to do. But then I thought, well, what's nice about, if there's anything nice about this pandemic, is that it gives us time to think. Instead of just going through our daily lives, sometimes we fall into a rut, and it's hard to escape that for whatever reason. You keep doing work because it sustains you, right? But what this has forced me to do is that, well, it's all shut down. So I can stop and evaluate what I'm doing, what I've been doing, what I would like to do in the future. It's also given me time to explore some hobbies, maybe, like I said, finish up, look at a recording that I wouldn't have otherwise had time to edit, or not really edit, just master. I'm putting together some speakers, which will be cool. I've never done that before. My own design. Yeah, I have had a few playing opportunities during the pandemic, not many. I did go to a violinist's home, and we were distanced, we wore masks, and there were video guys there too. They wore masks. It was a little uncomfortable, but I think it came off well. And, well, I remember James and Agneson called me, maybe it was towards the end of March, and he really wanted a way to find how to end at least one of these classes that I was playing for, to carry the students through to the end of the semester. And typically in that class, it's a 3-hour job every Tuesday, and I sort of coach the singers for the first hour, and then there's a 2-hour class led by John Greer, who's fantastic. Obviously, it's hard to do any sort of chamber music in this situation, and apps, whether it's Zoom or Facebook or whatever, they're not really tailored for music. So instead of trying to do chamber music that way with all the stuttering and lag, James and John both felt that it would be better to pre-record accompaniments and then have it sort of used karaoke style, recording files. I have some mics set up at home. I would submit recordings to a Google Drive folder. The student would then listen and try to sing with them. And then I'd get emails back like, yeah, Todd, that tempo doesn't work. Or, I need time to breathe here. Or, there was one, I caught myself. I was so embarrassed. I submitted a recording, and then immediately I thought, wait a minute. And I listened to it, and I realized I'd played an entire page with the wrong, like a missing accidental or something. So very quickly, I emailed her. I was like, just delete that. I'm gonna send you a better one.
Yeah.
So yeah, you always have to be careful with little details like that. But anyway, it ended up working out pretty well. They did their karaoke class every Tuesday, and yeah, it worked out well. We ended the year that way. What else have I been doing? I adjudicated, I graded some juries for the Taylor Academy, and I also adjudicated for the Provincial Music Festival. It was the first time, like a lot of these things, first time ever online.
Wow, amazing.
Yeah, and it was challenging. I think it was good and bad. The good was that if you ever get tired, and as an adjudicator, you do, because you
Yeah.
listen to a lot of people, your ears start to get tired, and your brain starts, everything is tired at a certain point. What's really nice is that you can press pause, have a cup of coffee, and listen again. Because, you know, when you adjudicate Kiwanis from 9 to 6 or longer,
Mhm.
it's really tough to sustain your energy.
Absolutely.
Now, the bad part is that usually in those situations, people rise to the challenge. They do, they get through the day.
Yeah.
At home, with all of these distractions, it ends up taking twice as long to to get anything done. Because I think, "Oh, I'm getting a little tired. I'm going to take a break." And
Yeah.
that break ends up being way too long. Then you have to start this person's performance again, and so there are some challenges, and I was surprised by how difficult it was to adjudicate it online. But and also dealing with the fact that a lot of these recordings are being made with cell phones.
Yeah.
So you have to sort of you have to listen through that somehow. Give people the benefit of the doubt about dynamic range and things like that.
You should have one of those t-shirts. I survived adjudicating during the pandemic.
Yeah, it was, I mean, it was something. I guess in a couple of weeks, between the juries and provincials, I heard about 110 performances. Uh,
Oh,
but
that's a lot of performances.
yeah, it's nice though, you know. And my favorite part is giving helpful advice, not just saying I think this and I don't think that. No one's interested in that anyway.
No, no, you're right.
So it's nice to give helpful comments.
Constructive feedback.
Yeah.
Wow, it sounds like you were really busy during the pandemic and things still seems to be a little bit crazy on your side. And it seems like you even picked up a new hobby in audio engineering. Tell me more about that. Is it one of your projects for the future?
Well, I've always been interested in recording.
Yeah.
It's always fascinated me, like it's been fascinating to me why, say, the same person can play, but and then the same piece, but if you record with a different microphone at a different distance or in a different location, it can sound surprisingly different, right?
Absolutely.
And as performers, if you think about it, it's silly how little we are trained about the tech side of things.
Hmm.
And it is important because it's part of our sound. It's part of what those people get as the result. And if we're going to be so careful about how we sound to a live audience, why would we then be so careless? And of course, don't get me wrong, a good audio technician is worth their weight in gold.
Yeah.
They really are. And I
Uh,
really respect what they do.
mhm.
What's nice, at least, about having some background in it,
Yeah.
in the theory of recording and just a basic knowledge of microphones, um, it gives you a little more control, ultimately. And I've been in situations with very good engineers
Mhm.
where my advice has actually proved to be helpful, and that's nice. It saved us half an hour in some cases of trying out different mic locations. I just said, "Can we try this? Because I think it will work," and it did.
Yeah.
And that's really helpful especially when that was for Trio Arkel actually.
Oh,
And yeah, we had great engineers from CBC working with us for that, and we saved a good amount of time because it was funny. They assumed
mhm.
that we would want the piano sort of positioned in a way that looked good and looks normal. And I thought, well, actually, if you change the geometry just a little bit, it's not going to interfere with our sight lines at all or the way we communicate. but it will be a lot easier to record for you guys. And they were like, thank you. So that part of things, that's fascinated me since undergrad. And I've spent thousands of hours on studying this stuff. And yeah, now it's actually become, I think I bought my first microphone while I was at Rice. And
Okay.
and I can easily say that my first recordings were very amateur.
Hey, that's okay. You got to start somewhere.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
yeah,
But I mean, having said that, yeah, I got a Canada Council grant from one of those recordings. So it wasn't terrible, it just wasn't great, right? And
so you got something. So,
yeah, so,
yeah.
as I learned more and had gained more experience, it actually started to become an asset instead of just something I did. And yeah, I think I feel pretty comfortable at least recording myself or a small ensemble. I'll leave it to the pros to record an orchestra. That's black art, if you will. That's a very mysterious and sought after skill.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But I would encourage musicians in general. I know it can seem tedious,
Mhm.
but just to familiarize yourselves with microphones, cameras, some terminology, it makes a world of difference. And
All right.
sometimes what if you can get a hall but you can't get a technician last minute?
True.
That happens all the time.
It does. And sometimes your technician ends up canceling on you and you're between a rock and a hard place. So, yeah, you're absolutely right. People must take more proactive measures in case of situations, right? Speaking of equipment, is there a particular brand of microphone that you would recommend to our audience, or specific software or equipment that you would recommend, or based on experience?
Not really. The choice of microphone is personal. Technicians get in heated arguments about types of microphone or directional pattern or how they're set up, distances between the mics and the performers. These things are all variables and they all depend on the room you're recording in, the particular instrument. The mics I happen to choose are a really nice set of ribbon microphones from Belgium. And
Oh,
yeah, and they're beautiful sounding. They're modern sounding, though. They don't sound like the old 30s ribbons do. They sound like modern mics with a nice top end, very natural. So those happen to suit me well for a large variety of things. But I've rented other microphones to good effect, and I have another pair of Swedish omnidirectionals that condenser microphones that I use sometimes. They're really most of these microphones. They're good. They're tools, right? You have to pick the right tool for the job. So I can't really recommend a brand or a type.
yeah.
I would say that it's important to at least pick an interface or a standalone recorder that is very reliable, that has good preamps. That's very important.
Okay. Thank you for the advice. I will definitely keep that in mind the next time I try a DIY project. Well, that was really a great conversation. My final question is, as we are in the week of Canada, who are your favorite Canadian classical musicians?
Well, in most interviews, people get really annoyed with me because I always say I don't have a favorite, and especially my favorite is to say I don't have a favorite composer or a favorite pianist or violinist. But okay, for Canadian artists, yeah, I can two come to mind immediately. The first would be James Ennis, who's, I mean, such a beautiful music maker and person, humble, generous, helpful,
Mhm.
very honest playing, which I really enjoy,
Yeah,
and he plays he plays the hell out of the violin.
pretty much
He's
does,
pretty amazing.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I really like James Ennis, and another would be Anton Querty,
Okay.
who sadly enough is no longer playing, but I think he continues to inspire um, through his recordings, and he was a very supporting, humble person, and a giant of a musician. He still is.
Mm-hmm.
Um, really amazing. Uh, at least once a week, I try to listen to
Yeah.
something of his, whether it's a Beethoven sonata or the Tchaikovsky Grand Sonata or something. It's- Anton was quite something.
Sounds like he was one of the bigger influences in your life.
Yeah, I think he was. I don't think I realized how much until he had to stop playing.
Mm-hmm.
There were a few notable experiences I had with his playing. Some of them were honestly just listening to recordings with by myself or with my brother or someone. But I remember a live performance he played. The whole program was fantasies, and the second half featured the Schumann Fantasy, and that was particularly inspiring. And every time I hear that piece, I think of him.
Well, everyone has a piece that is associated with them, right? Thank you so much, Todd, for your time. It was really lovely to have you here today. And for those of you watching, thanks for tuning in. After this, there will be a really wonderful performance of Todd, so you won't want to miss it. Please enjoy. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Until next time, bye!
Ciao.